So, welcome everyone to a new episode of our animal welfare podcast, Dare to Care, your podcast that sheds light on emerging topics related to animal well being, as well as the future of our planet. And I'm Annette, your host for today. I am a veterinarian and publishing editor in the field. And today we'll talk about vegan pet diets. So there are options out there to feed your companion animal on a plant-based diet, speaking especially about dogs and cats. And I must admit that the topic is intriguing because it's multifaceted and relates to so many areas in addition to animal welfare. Not only thinking, of course, about our companions, also the livestock animals that go into usual meat-based diets, I would say, but of course also environmental sustainability and our responsibility towards the planet. So vegan pet diets, they are a lot. I think they are promising. They are actively studied and I think partly controversial as well. But indeed giving us or me a lot of questions. So I'm very happy and fortunate that we have an expert on board today. So we will talk to the veterinary professor of animal welfare, Professor Andrew Knight. First of all, welcome, Andrew. Thank you for taking the time. Super great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Hi, thank you so much. And you have multiple expert affiliations, including Western Australia and the UK. So please tell us a bit more about yourself so our listeners know more about with whom I'm speaking today.
Sure. I've been an animal advocate for most of my adult life. I decided to try to become a veterinarian because I thought that would give me more specialized skills and knowledge when advocating for animals. And fast forward, 20 or 30 years, and I'm now a veterinary specialist in animal welfare, accredited in all major regions of the world where that's possible. As you said, I'm a professor of animal welfare. I've got affiliations with 3 universities at the moment, and I did a PhD on invasive animal research and alternatives, and then another one on vegan pet diets as well. So I now have a couple of non-profit organisations, and I lead a small team of researchers, and we are producing a very high volume of research outputs, mostly associated with vegan and sustainable pet diets. We are probably going to publish about 13 studies this year, which is an awful lot, really. And we do a very high volume of communications too. I speak at more than 25 conferences and universities every year and do a lot of media work. So all of this, I think, is helping to sort of transform knowledge and awareness about vegan and cultivated meat-based pet diets. And I'm really excited to be in this field. I think it's one of the most exciting fields at the moment for animal welfare, pet health, and environmental sustainability.
Yeah, thank you. I was able to browse parts of your extensive output, let's say, for the field. And why especially vegan diets or this option? Why did it caught your attention and why did you focus your research on this direction?
Yeah, I mean, we are living through an unfolding climate emergency. We know that the biggest threat to life on Earth in the future is likely to be climate change. And the biggest cause of that, of course, is greenhouse gases from fossil fuel burning. Most of us don't have any power to do anything about that, really. We can't change the energy that comes into our own homes and businesses very easily. And most of our transport is not for leisure. It's because we have to get to and from work. And we can't control what goes into building our houses. But there is one thing that we do have immediate control over, and that's what we put into our mouths and also the mouths of our dogs and cats. So we are well aware of the need to move towards a more sustainable food system. The greenhouse gas emissions from the food system alone without any other greenhouse gas sources will be sufficient to destroy any realistic chance of keeping the planetary surface temperature to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial averages. So we absolutely need to move to a more sustainable food system. But we've had a blind spot. We've assumed that that just means more sustainable diets for people, and we've kind of forgotten about our dogs and cats. There's some really interesting research been going on in this field just in the last few years, demonstrating that a medium-sized dog often consumes as much meat as an average person, depending upon the country. If you've got a large breed dog in your house or two medium-sized dogs, then the biggest source of dietary associated greenhouse gas emissions is not your diet, it's your dog's diet, actually. So there's a massive need to think about more sustainable diets for our dogs and cats. There are also literally billions of animals being consumed in the pet food system each year. That is, farmed animals being killed to feed dogs and cats. So there are potentially huge environmental benefits available and huge animal welfare benefits available as well. And yet nobody had really looked at this field other than a tiny group of researchers occasionally doing individual studies. So I finally managed to get a research grant back in 2020 when I was teaching full-time at a University of Winchester in the United Kingdom, where I was running a research centre and running a master's degree as well. I finally managed to get a research grant that enabled me to employ somebody to take over my marking and most of my teaching. That gave me time to do some research, and that's things have built from there. And now I have a small team, and we are publishing about a third of the research in this field. And we found some really exciting results, and so have some of the other researchers working in this field, and it's helping to transform knowledge and understanding about vegan and sustainable pet diets, actually.
Mhm. And it's really surprising that it has been a blind spot. If I imagine that, if I read correctly, I think every second household around the world has a companion animal. I think at least once. So the impact could indeed be huge to change something in this regard, right? Feeding your
Yeah,
pet.
indeed. It's interesting that the animal advocacy movement, for example, has long focused on the need to transition towards plant-based diets to save the lives of farmed animals and the species that are going extinct around the world because of deforestation caused by livestock farming. But the animal advocacy movement has forgotten about animals who are companion animals in our own homes. We've had this anthropocentric viewpoint. We've just been thinking about human diets, and we've forgotten to consider the diets of our dogs and cats. So that's very interesting. Yes.
And of course, coming with every change, like being it the guardian or for the veterinary view, we want to keep our pets healthy, right? Keep them safe and yeah, preserve their well-being. So speaking about your research and the outcomes, what does it tell us about the health of the animals once they are fed with vegan diets? There are results available, and what are they? And do you maybe see differences between dogs and cats?
Sure. I mean, in the last few years, commercial vegan diets have become relatively easy to get, mostly from online retailers. And these are diets that have been specially formulated to be nutritionally sound, to include all the nutrients that are necessary in the right proportions. Companies will often work with veterinary nutritional specialists to supplement the diets to make sure that all the right nutrients are included. So there have now been 11 studies showing good health outcomes for dogs fed vegan or vegetarian diets, mostly vegan diets. One study showing bad health outcomes, and one systematic review showing good outcomes. That's where often thousands of studies from the scientific literature are brought together and reviewed together with overall conclusions being drawn. With respect to cats, there are 3 studies showing good outcomes and 0 credible studies showing bad outcomes when vegan diets are fed. So the evidence is pretty overwhelming in this field. Animals fed these diets seem to have health outcomes which are as good or better, actually, than animals fed meat-based diets. And it kind of makes sense if you consider that these diets are being formulated to include all the nutrients that the dogs and cats require, but common dietary hazards are being excluded. The biggest dietary hazard seems to be animal-based ingredients for dogs and cats that have allergies or sensitivities to dietary ingredients, and about 80% of those seem to be animal sourced. So when you remove those, you tend to get a reduction in gastrointestinal problems, itchy skin, itchy ear canals, especially in dogs. And these are actually really common in dogs. Gastrointestinal disorders are some of the most common disorders, and certainly itchy skin and ear canals significantly impairs quality of life for many of these animals. So you get animals that seem to be healthier in these important ways that impact quality of life. The finding of the reduction of those problems is consistent across multiple studies. There's another consistent benefit too, which is dogs and cats that are overweight and obese, which is about half of all dogs and cats today, seem to consistently slim down and achieve more normal body weights, along with a reduction in mobility disorders. So they've got improvements in mobility and reduction in musculoskeletal problems. I think all those things are related. There seem to be an excess of calories in these meat-based diets, which is being resolved somehow through use of these commercial plant-based diets. So there's those couple of consistent health benefits and things that substantially improve quality of life for dogs and cats. The most exciting finding was not one of our studies. We've done the biggest studies in the field. We've looked at more than 2,500 dogs and 1,300 cats on fed either meat-based or vegan diets. But I think, to me, the most exciting study is not one of ours. It's by the other main research group working in this field, which has been led by veterinary nutritional specialist Sarah Dodd, and she's another vet who's also done a PhD in vegan pet food. So her research group at University of Guelph in Canada, one of the leading vet schools in Canada, has also published about a third of the research in this field. And they found that just over 1,200 previously owned dogs, they looked at their how old they were when they passed away, and they found that the dogs fed vegan diets were actually living 1.5 years longer than dogs fed meat-based or mixed diets. We often think that 1 year of a dog's life is roughly equivalent to, say, 7 years of a human life. So 1.5 years is about just over an extra decade of time. So if you're a person, I mean, we are people, but if we all had an extra decade, or we could give an extra decade to somebody that we cared about, imagine what a difference that would make. That's actually a really huge amount of extra time. And they're not just getting extra time, they're getting improved quality of life as well. It seems they have better mobility and a reduction in conditions that cause them discomfort, such as itchy skin and ear canals. So this, I think, is a really big deal for dog and cat guardians. And that's before we even get into issues such as the environmental benefits, which are game-changingly large.
Yeah, so this sounds like promising and very positive results indeed after testing those diets. And I was wondering, or correct me if I'm wrong, is this a mixture of studies? Because I think the results came from questionnaires, right? Like talking to guardians?
Not all of them.
Yeah,
there has been a mixture of studies, yeah. So
yeah.
There are some that are like the ones we've done, where we've surveyed thousands of pet owners, and that's good, because it means that we can reach thousands of people, and it means that when we have we're looking, for example, at the rates of occurrence of specific disorders, instead of just having 0, 1, or 2, we might have 10s or 20s of numbers in these different categories, which are big enough to then run statistical tests and find out whether differences are statistically significant on different diets. So that's the benefit of having thousands. The disadvantage is that you can't do things like blood tests because it's very expensive to do that with more than, say, 30 animals. The ones that have done blood tests, x-rays, studying blood biomarkers of organ health, blood nutrient levels, veterinary clinical examinations, these studies do exist as well. They tend to use much smaller numbers of animals, e.g. 30 animals, because that's affordable. What would be ideal would be to combine the two, to have all the veterinary clinical parameters being studied along with thousands of animals, but no one has yet volunteered the $1 million or so that would probably cost. And if anyone would like to make that available, please do contact me via the internet and we'll make that happen. But in the meantime, we have a body of evidence, which is 11 studies showing good health outcomes in dogs, which are a variety of methods. They include veterinary health assessments, guardians' own opinions. They include pretty objective data such as the numbers of veterinary visits in the last year, the prevalence of needing to use medication, and then there are smaller studies which do include veterinary clinical examinations, blood tests looking at blood nutrient levels and biomarkers of organ health, etc. So all of that together across these 11 studies, all showing the same kind of outcome, is a body of evidence which is stronger than that which exists to support virtually any other dietary choice. I've never seen, when I worked in veterinary clinical practice for more than a decade, treating thousands of dogs and cats, I would read the journals on a weekly basis, and I still do. And sometimes you would see a new drug advertised, and there might be one study cited to support the claim that the drug produced a benefit. Maybe there would be two. There would never be 11. I haven't seen such a strong body of evidence for any other dietary choice or indeed any other drug or veterinary clinical intervention of any kind. So actually, this is a really strong body of evidence, even though no particular piece of evidence tends to be perfect. But collectively, all pointing in the same direction should be telling us something.
I see it's a big data set, and also, as you said, complemented by, if you say there are results also on changes of the lifespan, like elongation. So there are obviously longitudinal studies also, like looking at the same animals over a longer period of time to give estimation about their lifespan. I mean, then you need to observe them and track them.
Well, I mean, that was a result reported in the study by Dodd and colleagues. They were looking at living animals, and they asked people how long the animals had been maintained on their current diets. And for the dogs, I think it was just over 3.5 years on average, which is a really big chunk of a pet's lifetime. For our studies, we to be eligible, the animals needed to be on the vegan diet or the meat-based diet for at least 1 year, which again for a human would be 7 years if you do a dog to human conversion. So these are pretty long-term studies, really.
Yeah. And as you already confirmed, usually these new diets are or should be formulated with veterinary nutritionists, right, to have these expert outcomes. Because another question would be, are these diets nutritionally sound, and how do we know? But maybe these answers the question that they are.
Yeah, there have been individual studies coming out every couple of years looking at small numbers of, say, vegan diets and finding nutritional problems. But what the critics forget is that there have been similar studies looking at meat-based pet diets also finding problems. And in fact, there have been many more meat-based products found to be nutritionally unsound than vegan products. To really look at this issue more systematically, I actually surveyed, this time not pet owners, but this time pet food companies, to see whether there were any differences in steps they were taking to ensure nutritional soundness and good quality of the diets. And we published that study a few years ago, and we looked at 19 companies producing meat-based diets and 10 companies producing vegetarian, vegan, or almost vegan diets. We looked at every step throughout the process, from what level of expertise were they using, such as veterinary nutritional specialists when they designed the diets. How did they know the formulations were sound? Were they designing them to meet the requirements of European or US authorities about pet nutrient levels? How did they check the nutrient qualities, the ingredient qualities? How did they try to preserve the qualities in the diets, look after them during storage and shipping to ensure nutritional soundness was maintained, and so on and so on. After doing that, we found that none of the companies were perfect. There were small areas in which all of them could improve, but overall it seemed that the companies producing the plant-based diets were slightly better overall, and we thought that this must be because these diets are newer and more controversial, and so maybe they were trying extra hard to ensure that their products were nutritionally sound, working with veterinary nutritionists and making sure they were fully supplemented with all the necessary nutrients. So, there's not a lot of difference between the groups, but when you study them sort of systematically, there aren't grounds for concern that the plant-based diets are more often nutritionally deficient. That's not true at all. I advise people to check the labeling of diets when they buy them. People should be looking for something that says this is a nutritionally complete diet, not one that is just intended as a treat or a snack. It should say it's nutritionally complete. It should come from a reputable pet food company, and they should be able to provide some basic information about how they know the diet is nutritionally sound. Did they manufacture it to meet the nutritional guidelines of authorities, such as European authorities? Were they working with veterinary nutritional specialists to try to ensure the diet's nutritionally sound? If the company has no information and won't answer questions, then that's when you should be looking for another company. But just those basic sort of due diligence steps should be enough. And as we see, when we look at the average health outcomes in many thousands of animals, it tends to be that in most respects there are no differences, but in some important respects, the animals fed vegan diets seem to be doing better, actually. So I don't think there's grounds for concern if people are using good quality vegan diets.
Thank you also for the practical advice, like how to check or what to look out for when choosing a diet or the packaging inspection. One issue, or let's say concern, I came across, for example, speaking about nutrients and especially the cats, is the issue of taurine, right? Like an essential amino acid that the cats especially need, and that maybe, let's say, the community was concerned that there might be deficiencies or that it might be unnatural to have synthetic taurine in plant-based diets. But isn't it actually true that the taurine in meat-based diets is also often a synthetic one? So I think maybe
Yes.
this argument is not really valid or true
Yeah.
or significant in this regard.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So, cats do need to get taurine in their diet. Dogs don't. They can manufacture it from other nutrients. Without taurine, they can suffer from blindness, birth defects, bleeding disorders, and so on. Eventually, it doesn't happen immediately, but eventually. In the 1960s, it was found that cats consuming meat-based pet food were getting taurine deficiency, even though taurine comes from meat. So this was investigated, and it was found that the high temperatures and pressures of pet food processing were damaging the nutrients. So robust nutrients such as minerals will probably be fine, but fragile nutrients such as vitamins and some amino acids can start to lose their biological activity and be damaged by processing of pet foods. So the problem was solved by simply supplementing the meat-based pet food with synthetic taurine. So meat-based commercial diets do need to be supplemented with a range of nutrients and things like preservatives, probably flavorants, colorants, maybe antimicrobials, antibacterials, antifungals. And the same really is true of vegan pet foods as well. They both need to be properly supplemented to ensure that they will be nutritionally sound. So the same synthetic taurine is used for both vegan and meat-based commercial pet foods.
Yeah, so this works, and this should then be nothing we should worry about in
That's
addition,
correct.
because yeah,
Yeah.
it's solved, and yeah, just an issue I came across. Yeah, thank you for the explanation. And if we now think about our pets and their welfare and enjoyment, what do we know? Do the pets actually enjoy these vegan diets? Are there results on their acceptance or any preferences? Could you
Yep.
find out something?
Obviously, it depends upon the individual pets. We all know that they're very much individuals with their own personalities and preferences. And some dogs have a reputation for wolfing down anything and then asking questions later. And some other animals can
True.
be very, very fussy indeed. But we studied thousands of animals to try and work out averages. So We did studies of more than 2,300 dogs and 1,100 cats, and these are the largest ones that have been done, although there have been several smaller ones showing similar results. We looked at behavioural indicators of palatability, so how much they're enjoying their food at meal times. And we found 10 of these behaviours for dogs and 15 for cats, which were all of those that had ever been described in the science previously, and some we were aware of from our veterinary experience. Things like whether dogs are likely to jump up and down, wolf down their food, salivate, bark, guard their food bowl. Cats seem to do lots of licking and sniffing, licking of lips, face, food bowls, sniffing, flicking of ears and tails, and so on. So the first thing we did was we worked out which of these behaviours were co-varying consistently with other behaviours and matched results of previous studies. And we're able to identify some as being positive indicators and some as being negative indicators, meaning they dislike their food. So we could work this out for most of the behaviours, and then we looked to see how these varied across the different diets. And after doing all of that and looking for statistically significant differences, we found that on average there weren't any. On average, it seemed that the dogs and cats consuming meat-based diets and vegan diets were enjoying their diets equally. And this kind of does make sense. If you're a company that produces a vegan diet that's not palatable, there's no fooling, dogs and cats. They're not like people that might, decide to eat something they don't like to be polite. They just will refuse to eat it. So the company will immediately go out of business, I would say. So obviously these diets are palatable. They do work commercially for companies that exist in the marketplace for any significant period of time. When you look at thousands of animals, there are no differences overall on how much the animals seem to enjoy these different diets. So the only other determinant of the welfare of these animals, apart from enjoyment, is nutritional soundness. And we know from the other studies that on average these diets are just as likely to be nutritionally sound, maybe slightly more so. And we know that the health outcomes are as good or better. So that's it. There isn't anything else to be concerned about regarding the welfare of these dogs and cats. In fact, there do seem to be certain potential for important benefits in terms of increased longevity and reduction in some of the most uncomfortable conditions like itchy skin and ear canals and so on.
And of course, what came to my mind, maybe concerning preferences also, and liking or disliking, as you said, individual preferences at your pet side. And this can also happen, of course, with meat-based diets, right? Because maybe they may like the first one, but not the second one. And if there is a choice also of vegan or plant-based diets, then hopefully each pet can find its preferred style or brand, let's say. Yeah. So if there's something to choose from.
I was giving talks, and I was showing off samples of vegan plant-based diets, also the world's first cultivated meat-based pet foods, which came out in February of 2025, and the world's first microbial protein-based pet foods also came out in the end of the same month. And I got asked to go to Amsterdam and film a segment for a Dutch TV series about sustainable living, and this one was going to be about pet food. And they said, could you feed dogs these 3 different diets in a park, a dog park one morning? So we put 3 bowls down in the ground, and we had plant-based vegan diets, we had cultivated meat-based pet food and microbial protein. And the cameras were rolling, and I knew this was going to reach many hundreds of thousands of people, and the sweat was starting to run off me because I was worried about what would happen if one of these dogs had a full breakfast already and wasn't very hungry and turned up its nose, and the companies would hate me and they wouldn't give me any more samples to show off at my talks, and I was quite concerned. But as a matter of fact, the dogs descended on them like high power vacuum cleaners and happily gobbled up the entire lot in a very short space of time. There didn't seem to be any difference in how much they were enjoying the different diets. So I guess there was nothing to worry about in that case.
It didn't let you down.
No,
Yeah.
I'm originally from Australia, and in Australia we have very occasional shark attacks, and there's the great white shark is well known, and when the great white shark is interested in maybe eating you, it will often first sort of bump you to just see what you are, because you're a strange creature in its environment and it doesn't know what you are, so it will bump you. Anyway, I was hovering over these food bowls, anxiously watching to see if anyone had been, and I felt this huge brown mass come up to my side, this shaggy mass, and it sort of bumped me and went past, and it knocked all the other dogs out of the way and descended and just wolfed up all of this food. There's this wonderful dog called Zelda, who was the star of the show and helped to ensure that none of his food got left. So it was a huge success. And I had been carefully guarding my cultivated meat-based pet food because there was almost none in the world. But when they said, "Do you want to try it to dogs on TV?" I said, "Absolutely. Here, take it all." And I'm so glad it wasn't wasted. It was well used.
Well entertaining.
Yes, indeed.
Hope it didn't hurt you.
No. Zelda was wonderful.
So yeah, we already talked about important aspects and characteristics of alternative diets that we have to consider. Of course, the health of the animal, acceptance, like palatability also. And another very significant factor that also motivates you to continue in this direction is, of course, the environmental impact, right? So maybe we could dive a bit more into this topic again. So my next question would be about, the environmental implications of both vegan, but also the non-vegan diets. So what's their issue?
Absolutely. So there have been several studies previously demonstrating that the impacts of pet food are actually substantial and something that we've had a blind spot about. We haven't realized how big they are. But nobody had worked out what difference it would make if the world's pet dogs and cats were transitioned onto a vegan diet. So I set out to do that in my most recent study, and it wasn't possible to do this until 2020, when for the first time a report was published giving us detailed information about the ingredients produced in pet food on a large scale, and it covered 2/3 of the US pet food market, which is the biggest one in the world. So I was able to look at that, and finally we had detailed information about the food animal species being used, the other ingredients, the tonnages, and so on. For the US, I was able to work out what the annual energy consumption of the pet dogs, cats, and for comparison, humans was, how much of that was supplied by animal-based ingredients. I made adjustments to account for the use of animal byproducts within pet food. And I worked out how much of the total livestock population in the US had been killed to feed dogs, cats, and people. And then I worked out, using existing data, what the environmental impacts of current pet food ingredients were and what they would be if the food energy was supplied by plant-based ingredients instead. And the results are really quite striking. I extrapolated all of this globally as well. In the US, I found that about 20% and probably more of all the farmed animals being killed in the food system each year are not being killed to feed people, but they're being killed to feed dogs and cats. So that means 20% of the environmental impacts of all of those farmed animals are attributable to pet food. Globally, it's a bit less because pet ownership's highest in the wealthiest countries, and that includes the US. Globally, it's about 9% of all the farmed animals are being killed to feed dogs and cats. So in around about that time, in fact, just prior to then, which was the most recent year when we had reliable dog and cat numbers globally, that was 2018, there were 78 billion land animals killed in the food system and 1 to 3 trillion fish and marine animals. Of those 78 billion, the numbers being killed to feed dogs and cats was about 9%, which was 6 billion to kill to feed dogs and 1 billion killed to feed cats. This, by the way, is conservative because this only included pet animals. So there are lots of working dogs, dogs in animal shelters, community-owned dogs who are fed pet food. They were all excluded. And if they were included, these numbers would probably double. If all the world's dogs were to transition, that is pet dogs, were to transition onto nutritionally sound vegan diets, you'd save 1.5 times the greenhouse gases produced by the entire United Kingdom. And you would save enough food energy to feed 450 million additional people, which is the entire population of Europe. If all the cats were to transition, it'd be enough food energy to feed the whole population of the UK, about 70 million additional people. So there are really, really big benefits in terms of saving of food animal lives, greenhouse gases, land, fresh water, and food energy that could enable us to feed millions of additional people and just about solve the world hunger problem, to be honest. So I think this is incredibly exciting. I think this is the most potentially beneficial yet neglected area within the entire environmental and animal welfare movement in terms of the sheer number of animals that can be helped, people that can be helped, and the massive environmental benefits.
Yeah, these are impressive numbers, I have to admit. And one could have thought that meat-based diets could be kind of sustainable as well, thinking about animal byproducts from the slaughter-based diets. But actually, if my research was correct, this is not even enough. And I think different companies, or let's say use cases, battle for these byproducts. So this is not all that goes into meat-based diets. I think it's not sufficient, and it's not these byproducts alone, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, commercial meat-based pet foods are mostly dry kibble, about 90% dry kibble, and they are just under 50% plant materials and just over 50% animal-based ingredients, along with lots of supplements, preservatives, and other additives mixed in. Of the animal-based materials, they're not all animal byproducts. Globally, they're about 3/4 animal byproducts, but in wealthier nations like the US, they're about half animal byproducts and about half human grade. And the animal byproduct component is actually less efficient to produce. One of the key things I did in my study was I looked at what proportion of food animal carcasses produce the animal byproducts and produce the human consumable meat, human grade meat. And I found that to get 1 kilogram of meat, you need more carcasses if that is byproducts than if it's human grade. It's actually less efficient to produce animal byproducts. You need to kill more livestock animals to get that commodity. Both animal byproducts and human grade meat are commodities that exist in a marketplace, and it's not true that all human grade meat is consumed by people and all animal byproducts are consumed by pets. Actually, only about 1/4 of animal byproducts are consumed by pets, and about 3/4 are used by many other social and industrial and sectors to produce all manner of products. They're much cheaper than human grade ingredients, which is why the pet food industry has used them historically so much to bring down the price of the products. But as countries become wealthier, like the United States, and consumers are willing to pay more to justify charging a higher price, companies start replacing the byproducts with higher grade ingredients, which is human grade meat. Not because there's much of a nutritional difference, however. So, you can use either ingredient if you use the so-called animal byproducts. It takes more livestock carcasses to produce the same quantity of meat, so it's actually less efficient. The difference is quite substantial. It's up to 1.9 times the number of livestock animals for cats and 1.4 times for dogs when you actually do the calculations. So there has been a narrative that animal byproducts are only used in pet food, and if they weren't used in pet food, they'd go to landfill. So this is beneficial recycling. That's completely false. They wouldn't go to landfill. They'd be sucked up by all the other sectors that use byproducts, and the price would change slightly. And there's been a narrative that lowers environmental impacts. That seems to be false as well. So actually, this seems to have been a marketing narrative created by the pet food industry rather than reality.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the additional insight and explanation. And I mean, we have a lot of interesting aspects to talk about, and this might be a bit off topic, but still, I want to ask just if it's possible to note on that, what is your opinion on another alternative, being it, for example, protein that's coming from insects into our pet foods? Do you have an opinion on that or
Yeah,
advice, something you'd like to share?
yes, indeed. So there has been a narrative that the use of insects within pet food and the food system in general is particularly environmentally sustainable because they can be fed organic waste products and they require very little land and energy. The reality seems to be that when this is done small scale, that's true. But in order to produce sufficient protein in a reliable manner, which would make it viable for use as a regular ingredient within the food system, you can't use organic waste products anymore. You now need to be using standard diets, which are consistent and which are reliable. So now you're needing to use feed crops directly to feed insects rather than waste products. The land becomes larger and there are significant energy inputs because the insects need to be kept warm. So it's not as environmentally friendly as the small scale operations indicate. The environmental benefits are not as great as simply using those feed crops to feed pets or people directly. The second problem that arises is that there's mixed evidence about the sentience of insects, and there's enough evidence to raise real grounds for concern that they do suffer when they are intensively farmed. The intensification of insect farming exceeds that of virtually any other species. So they're crowded even more highly in even smaller spaces with even less environmental enrichment. So there are concerns about animal welfare with respect to the insects as well. And the evidence isn't universally clear, but there's certainly enough evidence to have significant concern. So for both of those reasons, I don't support the use of insects within the food system. It doesn't seem as good for animal welfare or good for the environment as simply using plant-based ingredients directly without passing them through insects.
Yeah, makes sense. And thank you for bringing up also the sentience aspect, because that was also an ethical and welfare viewpoint that, yeah, I would have loved to bring up. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
Yes,
This is
not at all.
complex. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting area.
And what's still very positive, I believe, concerning the options we have to go plant-based, is, let's say, the consumer's view, the pet guardians that I think, referring to your recent studies, I think they are quite open to alternatives. Is that correct? Or could you give us some more insight what the guardians think about alternative diets?
Yeah, that's right. As of late 2025, we've literally just published the biggest studies looking at the consumer acceptance of sustainable dog food and sustainable cat food options. We found that sort of 85 to 89% of dog and cat guardians are currently feeding meat-based diets, so conventional or raw meat-based diets, which is what you would expect. But we found that quite a high proportion of that group would be interested in feeding more sustainable alternatives such as vegan or cultivated meat-based pet diets. And actually, it was 43% of all the dog guardians in that group, but surprisingly, 51% of the cat guardians in that group. So just more than half of all cat guardians currently feeding meat-based diets said that they would realistically be interested in choosing a more sustainable alternative. And the most popular alternatives seem to be cultivated meat-based pet foods at sort of around about 24 to 30% of these groups said that they'd realistically be willing to choose cultivated meat. which is great. The trouble is, cultivated meat is at an early stage of development. It almost doesn't exist. There are a tiny number of products available, and there are certainly plans to scale up production and make these more available. And when that happens, the surveys indicate consistently, not just ours but others as well, that this seems to be the most popular alternative. So that would be great. In the meantime, what we have is really the vegan pet diets are pretty well established. There's quite a lot of them available, and they're pretty easy to get in many regions of the world, usually from online retailers and sometimes in shops as well. So that was the next most popular group. It was vegan and vegetarian, and some pet guardians were also interested in insect-based diets. But as I've mentioned, I still have concerns about those. But vegan and vegetarian diets were the next most popular group of alternatives. So that was encouraging to see that such a significant proportion of people feeding meat-based diets, especially the cat guardians, were interested in more sustainable alternatives.
That's indeed encouraging, and would be sensible to pick this willingness up and move things forward, right? Because I think it must be a collective approach to change things, right? So yeah, thank you for the insight and to consumer acceptance and thoughts also. And I mean, we touched upon that already, but maybe to sum it up, which advice you have for those interested pet guardians. I know it can be on their shoulders alone. We can also add to that, but what advice do you have if they want to choose a good diet, vegan?
Yeah, I guess two things. One is for any dietary change, try to make the transition gradually, not suddenly. You may have a super enthusiastic animal that eats first and asks questions later on. Regardless, even if you're changing from a meat-based diet to a different meat-based diet, it's better to do a gradual transition if you can over a couple of weeks, because this allows the digestive enzymes to transition and the bacteria in the intestines to transition, which will decrease the chance of any adverse reactions. So that's the first thing. If you have an animal that is very fussy and been eating a particular flavor of meat-based pet food for many, many years and doesn't want to change because of the additives that the companies put in to give them specific flavors, then you may need to do your change very gradually over even 6 months. So you can try adding in a small amount of the new food and gradually changing the proportions, adding flavor enhancers, things like vegetable oil, spirulina, nori flakes, nutritional yeast. These are all on my website, sustainablepetfood.info, under the advice summary article. And you can try gently warming the food, fresh food, smelly food. Sense of smell is really important for dogs and cats. And gradual patience and persistence. Even if you have a very fussy animal and you only get halfway there in 6 months, don't feel that you've failed, because if you get half of the health benefits and half of the environmental benefits, that's not nothing. That's still really significant, actually. So it's about, I think, doing the best that you can. And the other thing, of course, as I mentioned before, is to try to make sure that it's a nutritionally sound diet. So I don't advise following recipes, adding supplements, and trying to make your own diet at home. It's possible to do that, but unless you're a nutritional expert, it's too easy to get that wrong. I advise purchasing a diet from one of the commercial pet food companies that hopefully has already done the hard work with veterinary nutritionists of making sure the diet's nutritionally sound. So purchase from a reputable pet food company that can provide some basic information about steps they've taken to ensure nutritional soundness, such as working with nutritionists or formulating the diet to meet the nutritional requirements of authorities. And it should say on the side somewhere that it's not just intended as a treat or a snack, but is a nutritionally complete diet for dogs or cats. So those are the key things to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And yeah, considering the mentioned resources and thinking of all parties involved, also maybe interested veterinarians could of course go there and get more expert information, right? Because maybe you have any additional advice for veterinarians that need to advise their clients or have to hand out or convey more information.
Yeah, if people want to look at the health studies, for example, that I've mentioned, or the environmental or the palatability ones, all of this, along with summaries, is on my website, which is sustainablepetfood.info.
Thank you. That's good to know. And maybe one additional question, if you want to add, has there been also any reaction from the veterinary or research community towards all these new and overwhelming results that we talked about?
Yes, I greatly enjoy presenting these results at veterinary conferences. I had the opportunity to do so just a few weeks ago at a major veterinary conference in Helsinki, where there are a couple of hundred vets. And I have a standard reaction every time, which is you have a sea of faces looking at you and a lot of skeptical impressions, and people who have come to be entertained. They want to hear about this crazy researcher that is going to tell them that cats can be fed vegan diets, and everyone knows cats are carnivores. So that's how they come, and that's, you can see the faces and body language, and it's great. And I really enjoy this now because I've done it so many times. And what I do is I get up and run through all the study results in the field and all of the scientific reasoning, and it's not hard to understand. It's pretty simple. And by the end, you see all the faces have switched because it completely makes sense. Almost all of the evidence in this field supports the use of these diets, providing that they are well manufactured to be nutritionally sound. And you just need to remind people that dogs and cats need specific nutrients, not any particular ingredient such as meat. And once you've done that, it's like a light bulb moment. They all go, aha, yes, of course, that makes sense. And you see all the faces and the body language switch by the end. And most of the audience then gets it, because most vets are actually rational and pay attention to scientific evidence. They're all skeptical in the beginning, but that's simply because they don't know what's occurred in this field. It's only been the last few years that nutritionally sound vegan diets have become widely available, and it's only been the last few years that most of the research studies have actually been published. Most vets don't know about these developments yet, so that's why they're skeptical. But once you run them through all the evidence, most, sadly not all, but most do then update their positions to become consistent with the evidence in this field. Very excitingly, the British Veterinary Association became the world's first one in 2024 to endorse the use of nutritionally sound vegan diets for dogs, at least, which happened after they took a good look at all the scientific evidence in this field. So there is progress. Much more needs to be done. I have been educating vets a lot in the United Kingdom, but awareness in most other regions seems to be very low. So this is a really key area in which we can have a huge impact, I think, by simply communicating the results, which is why your podcast is so important. And thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all the insights, because it also underlines again how important it is to be in the dialogue, to talk to each other, to go to conferences, to exchange also with veterinary associations, with the guardians, the researchers, yeah, the public, with everyone out there, right? Yeah, and I hope there will be more reactions, maybe also from, in addition to the British one, from other veterinary associations on that topic, and more evidence, and of course more studies going on.
Indeed, there are several more exciting studies forthcoming at the moment, and I'm very keen to speak to other veterinary audiences around the world, or indeed any audiences where people are interested in hearing about this. But obviously, podcasts are really helpful. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. And I could continue to talk about the topic for hours because of so many more questions. It's so interesting, but it still leads me slowly to the end of our episode, maybe to the final outlook. We touch upon that, but where do you see maybe the future for the vegan pet food diet development and And what are your next plans?
I think the future's really exciting in this area. The general pet food market is growing fast, driven by increasing pet ownership worldwide. It's increasing quicker than the human population. We have pet ownership expected to increase by 30% in Asia in the next decade as the disposable incomes of many of those societies increase as they continue to develop and they start to acquire pets. So they're going to have a population of 300 million dogs and cats, which will be the biggest one in the world in a decade. It's also going up across North America. It's also going up across Europe and other regions of the world. So the general pet food market is growing significantly, but the vegan pet food market is growing even faster. It was worth $27 billion, I think, in 2024, which had nearly tripled over a recent decade. It's going to nearly double again to more than $57 billion expected by 2034. So this is a compound annual growth rate of 8% per annum, which is even faster than the general pet food market. So there's a lot of interest in this sector, which is fantastic. Exciting developments are going to be not just more plant-based vegan diets, but the use of microbial protein to produce protein in giant fermentation vats and produce pet food that uses those. So the first of these came out earlier this year, 2025. There's now a production facility producing tens of thousands of litres a year, which is great. We might see the same start to come on stream with cultivated meat-based pet food as well, which would also be fantastic because consumers are so interested in that alternative. So it's a really exciting sector and there are really exciting developments coming in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious to see additional results, like to read from you again, from the other working groups again, and I hope, yeah, there will be more interest and collaborative effort to, yeah, to even move things much more forward than they are today. And then maybe next time we can speak about the next results.
Fantastic. I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So thank you very much again for taking the time, despite all, yeah, the busy tasks, researching, writing, publishing it, thinking about the next steps. Thank you again. It was super interesting and nice to have you here.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Super. Then I think, or I hope that our listeners enjoyed the episode as well and that you all learned a lot, spread the results further and think about that. And yeah, maybe we see each other on the next conference and can talk in person. Then, if not, we are always happy about feedback. So, for example, you can send us an email at podcast.daretocare@gmail.com. Or you will find us on Instagram. This would be dare2care_podcast. So please reach out with your thoughts, your feedback, and additional information and resources we talked about today, you will be able to find in our show notes attached to this episode. Dive in, let us know your thoughts, and yeah, we hope to meet you again in our next episode. Take care and goodbye, everyone.